What do they think of Jesus? We've been thinking about that a few times in recent months, really. What do they think of Jesus? And if you were to do a Google search for Jesus, especially a Google image search for Jesus, you would have a whole afternoon of what on earth? What on earth? Because there's so many different portrayals that people have put down on paper of Jesus. And you start to think that maybe it would have been a good idea if we'd have taken the biblical help not to think about trying to do that. Because when people have tried to depict Jesus, they inevitably distort him. They distort him. Sometimes you get pictures of Jesus that I call creepy Jesus, where he's standing there and he's holding his beating heart in his hands. And I think, what on earth? And I'm sure there's something to be delved into and explored there. I don't know what it is. Or at the other end of the sort of spectrum almost, you see pictures of buddy Jesus, where Jesus is holding up a big thumbs up and he's winking, as if he's your pal, or if he's trying to sell you a second-hand car. Not that there's anything wrong with second-hand cars, I have to say, in the presence of gentlemen there. Or sometimes you get bobbing head Jesus. Have you seen those little bobbing head things where you get in the back of the car? You sit out in the car or the dashboard, and sometimes a dog, and it just sort of sits and does this, And you get bobbing head Jesus, and you can go and buy one and sit it on the front of your dashboard, and Jesus will bob along, agreeing with everything, going anywhere you take him. And then there's a lot of ghostly Jesus. Jesus sort of hovering a few feet above the ground, surrounded by white and people doing this. And yeah, you get where that's coming from. But this is the kind of Jesus that you look up to and worship, but it'd be really difficult to follow. If the Jesus you have in your head is always just 2 feet off the ground, you're not going to be able to follow him practically in your everyday life. And then there's the blonde American Jesus. Have you ever seen him? He's just been for his perm, and nice long sort of flowing locks and startling blue eyes. He looks as if he's about to star in a Hollywood movie, and he's living the American dream. He's living the American dream. I thought about the question, what does the Scottish Jesus look like? What have Scotland made of Jesus? What have we turned him into? You can answer that for yourself. It's said that God made man in his own image. But ever since, we have been trying to return the favour. We've been trying to return the favour. And so we make a God that fits our own understanding, our own perspective, our own likes and our dislikes. And you might find that the Jesus that you follow is a lot like you. He agrees with all the things you agree with. He has the same political opinions as you. He has the same view on everything as you do. That's why you love him so much. Because he's a projection of yourself. Oh, blimey. What are you on this morning, Andrew? But it's true, isn't it? It's true. How do we get to the place where we just move a little bit beyond ourselves and see Jesus for who he is? And there's so much about Jesus in this passage which should really challenge and shake our perceptions of who Jesus is. Because, as I said to you, the context of this is he's just had his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. There's people there who have obviously looked at Jesus and said, here is the coming Messiah. We will make a fuss. We will sing. We will shout. We will make the way. We'll have a jolly festival as he comes into the town. But we all know, don't we, that the same crowd pretty much are probably going to be the same crowd that are shouting, crucify him, in just a week's time. How fickle is the crowd? And so we see the very same thing in operation here. Are you shuffling in your seat yet? I hope you are. I'm standing up, so I don't have to shuffle that far. But I'm worried, because we often have to come to the scripture and say, Jesus, who are you? What are you saying, and what are you doing? Jesus has moved into Jerusalem, the very heart of the political and the social and the religious life of his people. And he says and does things which are challenging, which ultimately really ramp up the potential of him really getting into trouble. He doesn't shrink back. Remember we talked about the fact that Jesus was going all the way to Jerusalem. He wasn't going to falter on this journey. And so Jesus, in this passage, I think, is speaking to two problems and giving one solution. He's speaking to two problems and he's giving one solution. So that's the coat pegs that we're going to hang this little message on. Two problems, one solution. The first problem is this: hypocrisy and fruitlessness. Hypocrisy and fruitlessness. The wee story about the fig tree, isn't that strange? Don't you find that strange? It's a bit weird. Poor fig tree. Isn't that what you think? It's not the fig tree's fault. I mean, it's just a tree. It's just standing there in its field doing its thing. It's not even thinking about it. But Jesus comes along and he sort of gives this fig tree a hard time. I think it was Einstein that said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you're not really going to get the best out of you. What's going on here? This poor fig tree. We're told in the passage it's not time for figs. But yet Jesus comes along and he gives this fig tree a hard time. Now, you would not believe the amount of commentator ink that has been spilled on what is going on in this passage. And the good news for you is I've read some of it, so you don't have to. And here's what I think is happening, enough for our look at this passage today. The tree that we see here was in leaf, but it had no fruit. And really what's coming through here is that this tree had the appearance of doing something fruitful, but it was nothing of the sort. It was nothing of the sort. It was possible for figs at this time of the year to produce some fruit. And you would realistically be able to think that this particular tree could be producing fruit, but it wasn't doing it. It wasn't even producing the little early signs of the fruit that might come later on in a different season. It was just in leaf. It was just in leaf. In other words, it was all show. It was all show. You know the root of the word hypocrite, don't you? Do you? It comes from a Greek idea of being an actor. So if you're an actor stepping up on a stage, you would stand up on the stage and you would put on your mask, and so you'd be a hypocrite. You were playing a different part. And so it wasn't originally a bad word. It wasn't a bad word to be a hypocrite. But as we come into the pages of the New Testament, and as Jesus starts to speak into the situation it sees, the whole term hypocrite in other places, and sort of nudged at here in this passage, starts to take on a different meaning. This was a tree that had all the appearance of being in fruit, but actually wasn't. The problem is hypocrisy and fruitlessness. We can't divorce this prophetic speaking to the tree from what Jesus was about to do next. And lots of the commentators, in fact almost most of the commentators, say that this is a prophetic, instead of just saying stuff about the temple and about Israel, Jesus takes this fig tree, which is often a symbol of the people of Israel, and he enacts this prophetic act. And as you see later on, when they come back the next day, the whole tree, which was in full leaf, had now actually withered at the root. And so its falseness had been proved. We can't divorce this act from what Jesus was about to do in the temple. He's saying to them, Israel, you appear to be fruitful, but you're barren. I think that's terrifying. I think that is terrifying. To be able to look at the whole show of cultural, religious, Jewish life, and to be so focused as to be able to say, with all gentleness and love and challenge, it's barren, people. It's barren. That's audacity. But I find it terrifying. How would Jesus look upon my life when he passed me by on the way to the temple? Would he find fruit? Would he find the fruit? Or is it all leaf and show? Isn't that terrifying? And yet it's grace that leads us to ask these questions, because We know that Jesus doesn't intend to leave us that way. His warnings and his challenges aren't just for condemnation's sake. They are for renewal, because Jesus was beginning a new thing. But here he is calling out hypocrisy and fruitfulness. Now, the next thing, you ready for this one? The next thing he calls out, the next problem, profiteering and religiosity. He's going with big guns for all the big problems of religious people. Because he goes from cursing the fig tree right into the temple courts. Imagine it. Imagine it. All the life going on. You've got the priests doing their stuff in the Holy of Holies, and you've got the court of the men, you've got the court of the Jewish women, you've got the court of the Gentiles. It's bustling, there's people everywhere. It's nearly Passover. It's absolutely stacked full. And here in walks Jesus, this upstart preacher from the north. He's been there before. We've had this guy here before, and here he's back. And we're about to get something interesting. Jesus causes a right rumpus at this temple. What's the problem here? He steps into the court of the Gentiles, where they're selling, every animal that you would need for your sacrifice. And in order to buy your sacrifice, to go and make your offering, you have to change your money, because you can't use your own money in the temple. You have to get special temple money, and they're going to charge you a lot more interest and exchange rate and all that sort of stuff. So there you are, you're a good, faithful Jewish pilgrim. You've made it all the way to your place of pilgrimage, and then they're going to fleece you. They're going to fleece you for your religious purposes. Now, I have to confess, I like to visit the Art Cathedral. Anyone else like to visit the Art Cathedral? Yeah? But do you know something I hate? I hate paying for the privilege. I hate paying for the privilege. And just say, I put on my hypocrisy face and say, I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray. But it's a similar principle. Here you are, you've made the pilgrimage for Passover to the temple, and you're being fleeced. There's an injustice at the heart of what is going on here. There's a financial injustice. They are using the system, the religious system, to take benefit from the people. To take benefit from the people. But there's something bigger going on here, because they're putting some stuff in the way of people coming to present their worship. They're putting some stuff in the way of people coming to present their worship. And that's why Jesus comes in and he says, what have you done to this place? What have you done to this place? This place is supposed to be a house of prayer for the nations, and you've made it into a den of thieves and robbers. What's Jesus' problem? Here is the place where God, in that dispensation, has chosen to dwell among his people. Coming to the temple was a big part of life, and they were being stopped. They were being taken advantage of. They were not being able to fulfill and do all that was being asked of them. Now, do we dare to bring this into the 21st century? Do we dare to bring it? Do we dare to bring it? Is there anything that we do that prevents people to come and to know the reality and the presence of God so that they can worship him too? Are there any of our actions or our attitudes, the way that we are, the things that we do, the way we set up the seats, or I don't know, is there anything that we do that prevents people coming to present themselves to God? Is it our attitudes? Is it our thoughts? Is it our actions? Is it our traditions? Is it the way we are? Is there anything that prevents them to come? I'm just asking the question. I don't know. I'm asking myself the question. Is there anything in me, as I go about my daily life, that prevents people from accessing the presence of God because of my attitudes and my actions? I think that's a difficult question to ask, isn't it? But yeah, I think when you look at this passage, we have to kind of ask it. Because Jesus obviously came for something else. He obviously came for something else. He's here. Now, let me just emphasize again where this is taking place. This money changing, this extortion is happening in the court of the Gentiles. Think about that for a second. This is the court of the Gentiles that is happening. It's not in the Holy of Holies. It's not in the court of the men. It's not in the court of the Jewish women. It's the court of the Gentiles. This is the place where all the nations were supposed to be able to come. They could go no further, but this was their just little bit of access by their fingernails into the courts of God. And yet this is where the extortion and the cheating and the money selling was happening. Here's Israel called to be a light to all the nations, but you couldn't get in because they were too busy with their religious nonsense and their selling and buying and their extortion. So there you are, your two problems. Aren't they problems? First problem, hypocrisy and fruitlessness. Second problem, profiteering and religiosity. But I'm glad Jesus went on. All preachers go on, don't they? But Jesus did go on as he walked through these days with his disciples. The next day, they're walking along. Peter notices, that fig tree is actually, it's not even in leaf anymore. It's actually withered. And isn't that reminiscent of the words that Jesus would say to his disciples about this temple? Hey, there's not one stone going to be standing on top of one another. And they're thinking, Jesus, how are you going to manage that? And of course, he was talking about his death and his resurrection, but he was also prophesying in other places about the destruction of this temple. And in 70 AD, the whole thing was brought to the ground. Jesus was serious about ending the temple system, which meant that you had to be a special kind of person, a special kind of thing, and get through all the religious mess. And he comes next day to this fig tree, and it's absolutely withered. It's a prophetic sign that something new is about to happen. But Jesus says to them, look, there is something that can be done about the spiritual state of this nation. Isn't that a good thing? There's something that can be done that is good news in the midst of all this barrenness. And when Peter says, look, Jesus, the fig tree has withered to the root, Jesus says, have faith in God. Have faith in God. He says, truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their heart, but believes what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, if you hold, next button, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive your sins. So in the context of withering and hypocrisy and fruitlessness and profiteering and religiosity, Jesus says there is a different way. It's turn your eyes to God. It's turn your eyes, put faith in him, believe in him, press in. Look, there's a more radical way to approach our life with God that goes deeper than even the roots of the fig tree. Step in and enter in, have faith in God, pray in faith, live in faith, move in faith, believe in him, trust in him, awaken yourselves. And then you will find that you are in the place of blessing. Live out not a sort of cold-hearted religiosity, but live fully and abundantly with grace and mercy to everyone who comes along your way. Don't be like those who prevent others knowing the goodness of God because of your selling and your all the rest of it. Be bountiful in your grace and your mercy and forgiveness, because that is how God has treated you. All of a sudden you start to hear all the other things that Jesus has said over these weeks and months and years coming back. As much as we forgive others, so we will forgive them. The person who forgives freely and abundantly is the one who has known forgiveness for themselves. And you must think they must start to hear all this coming back to them. And surely the penny drops. Surely the penny drops. Ultimately, be a people filled with faith and love. Become fruitful in love and grace. Now, I want to ask you this morning, is this the kind of Jesus that you're following? The one who isn't afraid to stand in front of you and ask you the difficult questions about your following, about the depth of your faith in the heart, and who doesn't hold out to you, who holds out to you the abundance that he comes to bring, the real alternative to fruitless religiosity. He comes and he invites you into vibrant faith and life, mountain-moving faith. Now, hang on a minute. If we're going to have mountain-moving faith, we'd wake up every morning and Goatfell would be in a different place. This is not some sort of weird literalist thing here. This is a stepping into the fullness of realizing who God is and seeing the challenges and situations in our life in perspective and knowing that the God who is faithful will hear and answer by prayer. But it's getting into that place of active faith. And the simple question is, will we do it? Will we continue to do it? Will we be those who are alive to the presence of this Jesus in our everyday lives? This is the kind of faith that Jesus is looking for. This is the kind of fruit, the kind of promise, the kind of rooted life in him. Not the life that will wither, but deeply rooted in him. As I close this morning, and before we come to the Lord's table, I want to read to you from Psalm 1. You may know it. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. Jesus may well have read Psalm 1 as he woke up that day, as he walked along that road, and as he saw that tree, and as he walked into that temple, and as he walked with his disciples afterwards on his way towards Calvary. And he says, here's the option. Be withered or be rooted. Here am I, the place to be rooted, Jesus said to them. It'll cost you, he's been telling them. It'll cost you. But it's nothing in comparison to what it means to be rooted and grounded. Well, how deep the Father's love for us. How vast beyond all measure that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. As we come to the table, we sing to him.